This looks good. We're good.
All right.
Okay. Yeah, we're live. Sorry about that. Okay, fantastic. All right, we are Natural Resources and Energy. Come back from the break, and we are joined by TJ Ford from the Service Department. To give us a little bit of 101 on how you all work. So I'll turn it over to you. And actually, would it be useful if we did some introductions first?
Up to you. I met Senator Williams prior, and I'm familiar with everybody else.
Okay,
so,
fantastic. I think we're good to go then. All right, take it away.
Great. Well, for the record, I'm TJ Ford, the Director of Regulated Utility Planning at the Public Service Department. Thank you for the opportunity to come in and discuss electricity. This is actually one of my favorite things to do. So I really hope to just provide some grounding information today. Not planning today to discuss any particular policy proposal or debate any policies, just trying to get a grounding for everybody and kind of the state of the state on electricity. And please stop me with any questions as we go forward. The plan for today is really to cover kind of a high level electric system, what it means going from the utilities that provide service and then their regulatory oversight to electric rates and what drives electric rates, and then talk a little bit about forecasted supply and demand for electricity. I'm hopeful that there is a part 2 to this, where we can actually talk about the history of our renewable energy programs and deployment from energy efficiency to the renewable energy standard. Again, without talking about policy yet, but just to ground us on what has happened, so that we can all be on the same page when we talk about and debate what should happen. So hopefully I can get through this in a little less than an hour, but please do stop me with questions here. But first I wanted to start with Public Service Department, since we haven't been in the committee this year, what we do, and we really represent Vermonters. We represent the public interest in energy, telecom, water and wastewater utility issues. I've added a org chart to the appendix of these slides, so you have it in what I've handed out and what's on the slide deck. But we have a lot of different divisions that carry out this mission, from telecommunications to the regulated utility planning division to the consumer affairs division that answers calls and helps consumers with their issues, efficiency and energy resources, to the state energy office, which actually runs some programs. We do have a new commissioner, Carrick Johnson, who in my brief experience, which is really focused on the mission here to serve all citizens through public advocacy in meeting the public's need for energy in a least cost, environmentally sound, efficient, reliable manner. And that really is our mission. And where does that come from? It comes from state energy policy. What's on the books right now, 30 VSA 202A. I often show this slide, the left half of this slide. It's kind of boring, but it is really one of our kind of well, to use a cliche, like a North Star for the department in how we think about our energy policy, reliability, sustainability, affordability, efficiency, and being environmentally sound. And that really in turn then directs our comprehensive energy plan. Our office has a responsibility every 6 years to do a comprehensive energy plan. The last one was in 2022. That plan really sets out the framework by which we look to make decisions, what we evaluate both societally and Vermont impacts, and what we feel like are the critical issues we need to address. The two themes to the energy plan last time were equity and grid evolution. And so I'll talk a little bit more about grid evolution a little later on today, and hopefully in the next, the 102 presentation. But as we talk about equity, it really is the energy plan laid out a framework to better engage with Vermonters. And over the course of 2022 and 2023, we undertook about an 18-month process to find out what Vermonters were thinking as it related to energy policy. And that process included statewide polling, included focus groups, about a dozen focus groups. It included dozens of meetings with regional planning commissions. And there's a lot of key takeaways, but one thing that is probably not surprising to you all, Vermonters prioritize affordability, reliability, and emissions reductions, right? When asked what the single most important factor when considering how Vermont gets its electricity, on the right-hand side, affordability was number one. But when you ask, how many say, an issue, reliability, affordability, emissions is important or very important when considering how Vermont gets its electricity. You can see the results there. Reliability, almost everybody said reliability is at least somewhat important. And then affordability came up next. And so those are the things as we have our state energy policy to our energy plan to really our outreach to Vermonters. That's what really guides the department when we make proposals and respond to proposals. So I wanted to set the stage about the department first, and then we could get into getting into a overview.
I have some questions about that, but I'm going to hold them till a little bit later.
Okay. So turning to the grid itself, there's really three core components that are forming the basis of what I will discuss today. Starting from the right-hand side, generation sources that produce electricity, power plants, fueled by all sorts of resources from solar to fuel oil to natural gas to nuclear, wind, our distribution and transmission lines, the poles and wires, taking that electricity generated and carrying it to the electricity consumers. In the past, for like a century, that line was just from the right-hand side to the left-hand side in one direction. That is changing and has changed over the last 10 years, where we are now, it's kind of a bi-directional here, where consumers have their own generation, and they have storage facilities, and they have load resources. We think about our load a little differently, in that they're actually resources that we can use to help us better manage the grid. And so this has really changed over the last 10 years, why one of the themes of the energy plan is grid evolution, and starts to set the stage for a lot of the policy choices we have before us. I won't spend too much time on this slide because I think you've had Valco and ISO New England in, but really there are multiple entities responsible for managing the grid and keeping the lights on. The distribution utilities, everybody's kind of familiar with your own experience with your distribution utility, no matter where you live, managing the poles and wires that connect to the end user, and then securing the supply of power. We have 18 of them in Vermont now, actually increased recently. GMP is Fremont Power is the largest and the only investor-owned utility. So the only for-profit utility in the state, about 275,000 customers. We have two cooperative utilities, Washington Electric, Vermont Electric Co-op, serving a lot of rural areas in the central and northern part of the state, and 14 municipal utilities that really range in size from 600 customers to over 20,000 customers at the Burlington Electric. So Velco owns the transmission system, the poles and wires that connect to the utilities within Vermont, and then connect Vermont to the rest of the region and Canada and New York as well. I think of Velco as kind of the highways of the electric grid, whereas the distribution utilities are kind of like the city and town streets, right? a little bit smaller quantities of power that get you right to your house, where the highway is speedy and bulk transit. I'll really just say two more things about Velco, funded through two mechanisms. One is a regional network service charge that pays for what's called bulk transition, those highways that are interconnected with New England and that serve all of New England ratepayers. So a good portion of Velco's costs are paid through a regional cost share. And in that cost share, we pay 4% of that. Vermont also pays 4% of other New England state utilities, transmission utilities as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about transmission costs in a minute. The other way that Velco is funded is through, it's called the Vermont Transmission Agreement, VTA. And it's the cost sharing agreement amongst the utilities in the state that pays for all the other costs that are not transmission. And Velco is owned by the utilities in the state. And then there's ISO New England, who manages the flow of electricity through the New England region. Make sure there's a reliable flow of electricity on a day-to-day basis. They design and implement wholesale markets and are responsible for transmission and reliability. Stop me if this is, the wrong level, if it's deep or if it's too high and too simple. I want to cover all bases.
Oh, this is good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so who has oversight of these entities, right? There's the distribution utilities, Velco, ISO New England, that are really operating the grid. So who's keeping an eye on them? At the broadest level, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, has authority by the Federal Power Act to regulate the sale of wholesale energy and interstate commerce. So you think of anything that is passing between states, it's regulated at the federal level. So that's both the kind of that wholesale power supply, electricity supply, and then also transmission. This transmission of that electricity obviously goes interstate. So they also regulate Velco and all of the transmission entities. So things like for Velco, like their return that they're allowed to get is regulated by FERC. And when Velco gets a return, because it's owned by our distribution utilities, that return kind of goes back to lower the cost of distribution utilities. Very unlike any other transmission company in New England, where the other ones are all private. And so that return just goes to their line. FERC also sets reliability requirements. So it says these are the standards by which you have to plan the system. And so a lot of the transmission that gets built in the region is built to ensure that that the system is reliable, the lights remain on. And so FERC regulates those reliability standards. ISO New England needs to have all their tariffs and all of the work that they do, the structure of their work approved by FERC. That is their regulatory oversight. The Department of Public Service, for its part, sometimes makes filings at FERC when the issues are really relevant to Vermont. Most of the time we do that through an organization called NESCO, that's the New England States Committee on Electricity. And that is all 6 New England states get together. We have regular calls and regular meetings to discuss what's going on and all these regional issues from reliability to rates of return to cost containment on transmission projects. We're discussing that and advocating through NESCO, both to ISO New England and to FERC. So more locally, we have the Public Utility Commission, who I believe came in. They regulate our distribution utility rates and return for GMP, and just allowable, what's recoverable in rates. They also regulate the siting of transmission and generation facilities in Vermont. So any project that is going to generate electricity needs to get a certificate of public good from the Public Utility Commission. They manage and ensure our distribution utilities are meeting our renewable energy requirements and also service quality requirements. Each distribution utility has a service quality reliability plan that tracks any number of metrics to ensure that customers are being responded to, they are provided good service and quality service. And then the department, we advocate before the Public Utility Commission on behalf of ratepayers. And as I mentioned, we have a number of other responsibilities as well, from state energy office to telecommunications policy to the comprehensive energy plan. Both the commission and the department are our authorities are in tight authority.
Okay. So in your role of advocating for the public, it sounds like you have data about the survey data about what's most important, where reliability, affordability, and natural resource impact. Do you have other ways that the public can tell you what they want so you can advocate for them?
Yeah, so we can, so there's kind of the micro and macro ways that we can be connected. So we have a consumer affairs division that can be reached, and that we really advocate on, if somebody was wrongly disconnected or billed or has issues with their utility, we can help to mediate that and resolve that. And then if there's no mediation available, that goes before the commission and to adjudicate it, and we advocate for the customer. We also, on a more macro level, do pretty regular engagement through like before we publish the energy plan, to hear what is important to Vermonters, what we should focus on, and then this engagement afterwards. And so increasingly, I will say, before the last couple of years, we weren't necessarily great at engaging the public. I think we have gotten much better over the last couple of years at doing so. And part of that is evidenced by the report we did last year, but on program level now, when we want to put forth a program or recommend a program, we'll often go out and either hold a public hearing, or we will otherwise solicit input through written comments, or just even a little more informal through webinars. We also work through the regional planning just a little bit now.
I just wonder if the sort of quote unquote average Vermonter, whoever that is, knows what you do and that you're there to be their advocate.
Yeah, that's a good question. I wonder that also. And so I think we're trying to do better on that. And I know with Commissioner Johnson, we are taking another look and focusing on how best we can communicate. And I think that's probably an area we can improve on, communicate what we're doing and what we need input on to what we might want to do going forward.
Yeah.
And so we're looking to improve that. But the things like the polling, those are, that's a random sample of Vermonters. So we're, a lot of times it's the energy engaged that come to a public hearing, right? And so the polling and the focus groups really carry a lot of weight, at least in my mind, where it is more of a representative sample of Vermonters, and the focus groups are pulled directly from the random polling. And so I think there's areas to improve to get you your point, and I think we're heading in the right direction.
Since we're paused, I'm also gonna pile on with a question, if that's okay.
Sure.
Particularly about this,
Sure.
this slide. So, wondering about, just some of this data that's here. I mean, reliability, affordability, natural resource impact. Reliability and affordability seem like they could be quantifiable somehow? And I mean, affordability means different things to different people. Is it possible to drill down into that data in terms of like, how affordable is affordable? Like, was that defined somewhere for folks? Just wondering if there's more behind that data. Does that make sense?
Right, and so for the polling, the word affordability was not defined, so it was in the eye of the beholder here. And I think that is, it's a tough question.
Sure.
I think a lot of there's a lot of good data in, for example, the Efficiency Vermont Energy Burden Report, which speaks to affordability in several different ways that I think are all really useful. In terms of reliability, we do have data on things, and this is part of the system quality, service quality reliability plans on. The acronyms are SAFE and CADI, but it's like a system average interruption duration.
Okay.
Or frequency, and then customer average interruption duration. So how long, or how many times people are out and how long they're out for.
Yeah.
And so we do have data on that. The department is gearing up to propose a proceeding before the commission to better understand that data from utilities and better focus what we collect and create actual targets that could improve on. And so that's that one. We do have more data on reliability, and we need even more really on like a circuit level. And so,
Great. Thank you.
yes.
Just helpful to have that clarified.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna switch gears a little bit to start talking about rates. All kinds of stuff up in the way for the. So on the right here, you're seeing EIA data. That's the Energy Information Administration data on overall customer rates by month. And it's Vermont compared with other states in New England. Vermont is the solid green line, and the other states are all dotted lines. You can see here, Vermont has some of the most stable and lowest rates in the Northeast. One big difference from Vermont relative to the rest of New England is that we remain vertically integrated. What that means is Vermont utilities can own generation, transmission, and distribution. They can do all three phases of producing to delivering electricity. In other states, those functions are split up, where retail is called retail choice in other states, and so consumers actually have a choice of who they get their actual power from. They still do have a backstop like distribution charge, one utility that owns the wires and and have to pay a distribution charge and a transmission charge, but there's you can choose your provider. Also in other states, those providers are only allowed to enter into contracts between 6 months and 1 year. Vermont, and that's part of the reason why you see a whole lot of volatility in this chart for other states. Vermont, we're allowed to, because of that structure, we can enter into long-term contracts or ownership arrangements. And so what that does is allows us to hedge our power supply. So we forecast how much demand we're going to have, and we cover well in advance. At any given time, it's 85 to 95% of our demand is covered. And so, really what that does is allow us to ride through big spikes in the market. When Russia invaded Ukraine, we saw New Hampshire have 100% rate increases. With other states, 50, 60% rate increases. In Vermont, you can see Vermont's costs went up, but we were insulated from those huge spikes. And we went up a little more gradually.
It's very encouraging.
So are they all gonna do the same thing that we're doing? I mean, if I look at that map, I would.
Would go to vertical integration. Well, so in the 2000s, the early 2000s, everybody was vertically integrated.
Okay.
And all the other states moved to retail choice. The theory that competition will reduce prices for everybody. That has had mixed success, I would say. And you know, there's some, even as they transition, there was some embedded power supply in their long-term contracts or resources, but you know, Vermont was on the path to also do that, but we were kind of last. And as the commission was considering what to do, other states who had gone to retail choice were starting to see their first price spike. And this data doesn't go back that far on the screen, but in like 2006 and 7, you know, Baltimore had a 70% rate increase of the utility there, and it started to see that, and Vermont said, well, maybe we don't want to do that. It kind of got mothballed, the potential move. And so we are a little unique as far as New England goes there. And I think it has served us fairly well. You know, even at the times that we weren't the lowest, you can see some dips that go below. You know, stability has a lot of value as well. So. Okay, so what makes up those rates? There's different categories, I guess we call them, that really make up what consumers pay in rates. Power and supply and transmission, they're often thought of together, so that's why they're here together, is almost 2/3 of what makes up our rates, or 60%, I guess 3/5 is better fraction. With other operations like our distribution lines and regular maintenance being about 16%, and then kind of the cost of money essentially being almost a quarter of our rates. As part of the power supply and transmission, if you break that up more, their transmission, it's on the slide as regional and local network service. That's about 17% of the 100%. So about 45% is power supply, 17%, 17% is transmission. You can see kind of the different categories that fall in here: energy capacity, our renewable energy standard, and then ancillary services. There are things like ISO New England will to ensure reliability of the grid, sometimes institutes programs. There's one called the Winter Reliability Program that was several years ago, and it's gone by different names since then, but those are costs that to keep the grid whole that are passed on to all the consumers in New England. Some of those costs can be significant. There is the Mystic Generating Station is a nuclear station in Connecticut that a couple of years ago was ISO New England determined that it was necessary to maintain the reliability of the system. And Vermont alone paid hundreds of millions of dollars to keep that plant on. And so you can imagine, and that's, you know, only our share of the region. So there are other things that can be big components. Now those costs have gone down a little bit, but there are other programs that are backed up. So some of the things within that, particularly in the power supply and transmission piece, I want to just mention that affect rates here. And one of those is wholesale electricity prices. So those prices that are managed by ISO New England, these are kind of real time or day ahead prices in the blue, the actuals. So within a day or two of what the price of electricity is in the Vermont zone. And you can see it goes up in the winter, it's more expensive in the winter and down in the summer. and what the average has been. And on the right in the gray, you can see what the forward prices are for electricity. So right now you can go buy electricity for the future, kind of making a bet on what you think the price is. And that's, there's a market for that is very liquid in the near term, in that there's a lot of people making those trades and those bets, a lot of utilities, financial institutions, et cetera. And you can see that those prices are expected to be higher. What people who are, their livelihood is to predict what the price is going to be, are putting money on these prices here and where the market is settling. So how's that affect if we're 85 to 95% hedged, as I mentioned before, right? Our utilities are secure. Well, that changes over time as we go out. Utilities have to, some contracts expire and you have to re-up that contract, or there's like that 5 to 15% that is an open position that you're purchasing those either on the short term at what these prices are, or in the long term, it's kind of based on what these prices are, because that is how those deals are made. So wholesale energy prices, electricity prices are expected to go up, not as high as they were when Russia invaded Ukraine, but higher than they are right now. And so cost pressure. Another really big component is transmission costs, and transmission costs are expected to increase over the next 5 years and beyond. The blue here are those regional network service charges, all of that bulk transmission that from Belco and National Grid and EverSource, all those transmission companies in New England. And we're expecting, this is a Belco forecast, but expecting those costs to increase. Part of that is there's a lot of what's called asset condition projects. Like we need to, our lines in New England are 40, 50 years old sometimes, and the poles need to be replaced. Part of that, which is really not necessarily focused here or shown here, is right sizing of that transmission. So if we're replacing it, well, we know load is going to grow, or we think load is going to grow. We also have other generation that we may want to come online, whether it's offshore wind or other sited generation. And we want to make sure we're not just repairing a line and then having to go back 5 years later to actually make that line bigger, right? And so we're expecting transmission costs to increase, and the department, for its part, is spending a whole lot of time right now advocating regionally on cost containment for utilities in New England. We think Belco does a pretty good job of maintaining its costs. Other utilities, for a lot of reasons, but other utilities, their poles and wires are costing more. Part of that is right-of-ways are more expensive, or land is more expensive. Part of that is we think they could do it better. And so those costs have a real direct impact to Vermonters. And so we're really focused right now on getting a handle on these costs. And that's in partnership with all the other states.
TJ, how much of that increase is related to the GMP initiative to start burying stuff, or is it?
Right, in this, none of this that we're here. So that comes kind of on the distribution scale. And so really this slide is really talking about bulk transmission costs. The GMP initiative, we will see when we get some benefit cost analysis as to, there's one, I'll try and say this objectively. There's one, path forward where burying or hardening the system actually reduces costs because you're not responding to storms as much, right?
Any piece of liability.
Yes.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if we underground in places, or depending on the expense of places, or if we're not choosing the right solution for the situation, it could cost more. And so I think that is still to be seen on how that actually plays out. And so I think another time we could go into more detail on like that initiative specifically. There was a whole proceeding about it, and different parties had different opinions on how we should move forward.
So I guess
Everybody said we should move forward in some way, and it was just kind of the magnitude, scale, and the analysis that was at the base.
So this is before it gets to GMP, so you're saying.
Correct. This is like the Velco, the national grid, the transmission, and regional also. Yes. Yeah.
One question about this, I realize this is a Velco graph, but just thinking about this as cost for transmission, I'm seeing that a lot of these lines are about revenue. And so it's just I assume that what that means is that they're paying the ICE on New England Schedule 9, right? Like that's money going out still.
Yes,
Right.
yeah, so the way, the way this is presented really, and it can be more clear, thank you for the question. The revenue is revenue coming to Velco from the utilities in order to pass it through to
Okay.
to the rest of
Okay.
or to cover those costs.
Okay.
So Velco gets charged that RNS, Regional Network Service Charge, and they in turn pass that on to our distribution utilities.
Okay, thank you.
Because Velco doesn't actually have any ratepayers, right? They just have the utilities
Yeah,
owned by
they're
the
members.
utilities, right?
Thank you.
Yep, that's a good question. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide. Other things, the point of this slide is that other policy choices that we make also have costs. And that is a trade-off that we struggle with all the time, because they also have benefits. And so this is the forecast that the Department of Public Service does a forecast every year as required by statute of what the renewable energy standard costs are. This chart is just does not include tier 3. The chart doesn't include tier 3 because it's confusing. The language above does include tier 3, and the reason we wanted to keep that there is because tier 3 right now is actually a cost reducer of the renewable energy standard.
Just for context, we haven't actually had a one-on-one on what the different tiers are. So
Sorry,
it's okay. We'll put an asterisk by it, and we'll come back to talk more about the tiers at some other point. Hopefully, yes.
Is this inflation adjusted or not?
I believe these are actual expected costs. I have to check.
That would include inflation. Okay,
Yes.
all right, cool, thanks.
Okay, so why did I show you a bunch of drivers of rates? This is just one illustration. You can do this with other resources, but it's an illustration of a single zone whole climate heat pump and just the homeowner annual cost comparison, not including kind of the cost to install the heat pump, just kind of the fuel cost. And so you see fuel oil only is to heat their home a little over $2,000. If you install a heat pump in WEX territory, assuming you displace 30% of your fuel oil with that heat pump, you actually end up paying more annually, even before you get to the cost of the heat pump, before you get to any maintenance of the heat pump, you end up paying more just for those kind of fuel costs. In GMP's territory, Remote Power's territory, it's slightly less, but really this is just illustrating the importance of when we're have impacts on rates, it has impacts on our other policy goals. And so I couldn't go by without leaving the slide. And there are a lot of assumptions that go into this, what the fuel oil price is, you know, and, you know, how much is displaced, et cetera. The efficiency of the cold climate heat pump, et cetera. So, Senator Harding, you have a question? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, it's all right. No,
She's the chair.
yeah.
You answered one of my questions was the fuel oil price. And this, you're using that $3.50 per gallon price for this. You're not
Correct.
assuming any changes in fuel oil prices.
Alright.
Because they're more volatile than electric prices by far.
Agreed. So this doesn't show like the stability of prices, and it doesn't show an increase, but so it does show though. What we often say and are concerned with is the economic proposition for a customer to switch, right? And they often are, this is kind of what they're often look like. They're not looking at what fuel oil is in 5 or 6 years. They're often saying, okay, well, it's $3.50 a gallon now, and I pay this rate. It also doesn't include rates increasing per time either. And so
Right,
there's,
but I think your point earlier with the stable electric rates, you know, the electric rates are quite stable comparatively. And you could almost overlay the two on top of each other and see the spikes up and down of oil rates, whereas the electric rate is much more stable. So to the extent that reliability and stability is something that people want, the option of moving more toward electric is more stable and reliable in terms of price.
yes. It's a great point, and I wasn't trying to knock heat pumps with this slide, I was illustrating kind of that
Right.
choice that customers are making, so I.
What is, just a technical question, your third bullet point is cold climate heat pumps is what CCHP is,
Correct,
I didn't
yes.
figure that out, but what is COP?
I will spell that out in future slides, coefficient of performance.
Okay.
And so that's, if you think, electric heat is, like electric resistance heat is basically 100% of the electricity delivered to the home kind of is turned into heat.
Mhm.
This is of the electricity delivered to the home, 240% of that is delivered as heat. So it actually really improves the performance of and so 2.4 is the coefficient of performance. That's how much better the heat pump is than electric resistance.
You're just moving the heat rather than burning it.
Right, and capturing the ambient energy in the air as well.
I guess, here and there, yes.
As more and more people move to heat pumps, cars are using more electricity, does that make it easier or harder to maintain that stability, those long-term contracts and stability that you talked about early on?
It depends.
What's that?
It depends. I have a couple slides that will point to that coming up. And if I don't address that question directly, please remind me, but I will.
Yeah, so I don't expect the answer, but just maybe we could talk about it later. I'm really curious to understand in this, if fuel oil displacement increases, does this problem become of the person on wet pay more become more acute or less acute?
That was the formula.
Yeah, and I definitely know if COP goes up, their problem, it gets better. But I'm just curious about understanding that, so maybe not for here, but sometime maybe we can chat about it.
Okay, I will follow up with that.
Yeah, I would like to see the math.
Yeah, I can send you.
It's like common theme with me.
Yeah,
That's good. I'm glad to hear that.
it makes me
I'd like
think
to hear
about,
that.
Excellent.
like heating degree days, and it makes me think about, you know, how the COP changes based on the outdoor temperature, and anyway, there's just a lot of, so there's a lot underneath there, to dig into.
Is wet really a bit of an outlier, because I think it's 9 customers a mile, and it's all residential almost. I think one of the hardest markets to try to get, are they a bit of an outlier?
They are, I think they have some of the higher rates in because of those reasons, correct. But there are other utilities that have higher rates than Green Mountain Power also, so they're not the only.
Okay.
Okay, so, these charts talk about electric demand, so it has been stable. The chart on the top left is our load from 2000, and that is relatively flat. A lot of the reason of that is, our energy efficiency programs. I have a slide on that in a moment. Load is forecasted to increase over time, largely due to heat pumps and electric vehicles. That slide on the bottom left is the Velco long-range transmission plan, statewide load forecast. Kind of a business as usual and a policy scenario of load increasing. On the right-hand side, it's their demand forecast. So when I talk about demand, I'm talking about megawatts. That's a measure of volume, right? How much at any one given moment. When I'm talking, the charts on the left-hand side are megawatt hours. That's like a throughput. And so it's that demand function over time, the measure of the energy. And so on the right-hand side, you can see our summer and winter demand, or winter on the top, summer on the bottom, projections. And I will note that these demand projections are assuming no load management, and we'll get to load management in the 102 session. But really, electric vehicle demand, assuming none of that is managed. And so we already know that right now, about 65% of the electric vehicles in the state are on a managed rate, so that they are encouraged to I said that incorrectly, let me correct myself. About 30% of the electric vehicles in the state are on a managed rate. About 65 to 75% of new vehicles coming online now are joining the managed rate. So that 30% is increasing over time. I'll go into more detail about that, but I just wanted to make that point because these demand projections are really high, but we already have mechanisms in place to help manage that. And so, but Velco's aim here was, here's the scenario that we might have to plan for. What are the solutions? Solution number one is manage the load.
On these charts on the right, I'm trying to see what the colors mean. There's net, base, EV, HV, and PV. What are those?
So those are indications of what is driving the increase. And so you see the green is electric vehicles, and for the winter, that is like the biggest increase to the demand.
Okay. HV is heat pumps.
Right, HV is heat pumps, and PV is solar, and that is on there really because it for the summer it's actually a negative.
Because it's a producer.
Right.
Yeah.
And so those are when Velco does its forecasting and they go through something called the Vermont System Planning Committee as a venue to vet their forecast. Those three assumptions are some of the most critical assumptions of what's going to happen in the future with electric vehicles and heat pumps and solar as to what is going to happen on the system.
Does this include battery storage?
This does not right now include battery storage. So battery storage is another one of those solutions. So Velco's forecasting worst case, right? Load management, storage, other generation resources, what we call behind the meter. So it would all show up. Okay, I mentioned energy efficiency. I won't spend a lot of time here, so I'm running out of time. But the point of this slide is to say, our load has been flat historically. Yeah, about 15% of our load has been met by energy efficiency resources. So this is a big success story. If you want, this is excellent, and that load has been met at a cost lower than what it otherwise would have cost to procure that power supply. And so, kind of the orange here is what our annual energy usage would have been, but for efficiency programs. In the future, that electric energy efficiency potential is less. We've gotten a lot of the low hanging fruit with lighting. It's harder to get that potential, it's harder to get it. There is still potential there. I will talk more about energy efficiency in part two as well, what our programs are. A little more detail on forecasts of heat pumps and electric vehicles. Like I said, they're the main drivers of load increases. We have a low and a high scenario or a forecast of heat pumps. We've been running around 11,000 to 13,000 per year installed in the state. And you know, as of 2024, we're about 80 to 90,000 heat pumps installed in the state.
So for this year.
That's cumulative through this year,
Oh.
through this year. Yeah, about, I think 2024 had a little over 11,000.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
80 or 90,000 heat pumps or 80 or 90,000 residents have installed heat pumps?
They are heat pumps.
Totally,
Yes, okay. And they do vary. Some of these are full home inducted heat pumps. That counts as one. And some of them are, you know, the multi-head zones, and you have like 4 of them. So,
Okay.
On the right, there are electric vehicles. You can see kind of the trajectory that we are on with electric vehicles. You know, as of October 2024, we had 50% more EVs than the previous year installed. So on a good trajectory. We still only are a little less than 3% of the state's registered vehicles are electric vehicles. And I'm using that in totality by electric vehicle, either all electric or the plug-in hybrid here. Okay, so when is that load going to happen? And this is partially why I said it depends. Say your question, Senator Barlow, is these slides are a little bit old, but they still make the point here. ISO New England did a regional New England forecast of winter and summer peak, or actually an annual. This is like a 8760. There's 8,760 hours in a year, and so an 8760 forecast of 1 year. On the top, that's kind of what it is, and on the bottom, that's what is projected for 2050. And you can see that from electric vehicles and heat pumps, that load is expected to come on in the winter, and be, you know, there'll be load all year round, but primarily driving need in the winter. And so you know, it depends on, you know, do electric vehicles and heat pumps make it easier to keep rates low? Well, if we don't have to, if we don't need to build infrastructure because of them, and if we don't need to purchase a lot of expensive power in those times, then yes, then you're adding more kilowatt hours, megawatt hours to kind of a fixed set of costs, and you can spread those costs over more kilowatt hours, and that helps to reduce rate pressures. But then if you add infrastructure onto that, then it could cause rate pressures on up. So there's not a clean answer, but you know, our policies and what we're trying to, when we talk about grid evolution, a lot of it is how do we manage and get the most efficiency out of our current grid or load. Right, load management and generation management too. And there's tools in the toolbox on the generation side. So.
And I know we just have a few more minutes here, and we're gonna have them back.
Right.
The remainder. Sorry.
Yes.
So go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I have one more topic, and I think I know it's 11:29, but
You're
we have
good.
4 more minutes. So So. I just showed you the demand side, and so here is the supply side. Our 2023 electric power mix, based on physical deliveries, and what that means is what utilities have entitlement to by contract or by ownership rights. It does not include the attributes of that power, which can be separated from that and counted by renewable energy credits. And so 91% of our 2023 physical deliveries were carbon-free, and I include nuclear and carbon-free. And what I mean by that is at the point of combustion. So 2023, we were 91% carbon-free. It's measured by kind of those contracts and entitlements. So but we have a renewable energy standard, and we'll talk more about renewable energy standard, but it tracks attributes of the power. And you can, when a renewable energy generator or any generator puts a megawatt hour on the system, it is assigned an attribute, whether it's a renewable attribute or a natural gas attribute or a nuclear attribute. Every megawatt hour of electricity equals one renewable energy certificate. And even those attributes, even when they're not renewable, they still are called RECs. So the renewable energy credits provide the mechanism to demonstrate that someone created the electrons coming from renewable resources or from a particular resource. They prevent two different entities from claiming credit for those resources. And then in Vermont and in other states, they're used to demonstrate compliance with our renewable energy standard. You can see that last. Oh, right. And so you can, when a utility purchases power, they can either purchase both the energy and the capacity, the throughput and the volume, and the renewable energy credits all in one bundle, or those different products can be separated, and you can purchase just the energy, you can purchase just the capacity, the ability to deliver at that one time, or you can purchase the attribute, and you can do either or. So last slide, two slides, but last point. After you account for our renewable energy credits, we were 90% carbon-free in 2023. And so these are the attributes that the utilities have submitted to the Public Utility Commission to certify compliance with their renewable energy requirements. And it changes our mix. You see a little less nuclear in there. You don't see wind in there. You see less solar, and you see a lot of Hydro-Quebec system mix.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
That is counterintuitive. That after buying the REC credits, it's low, we have actually lower or higher carbon, I guess, because.
Correct. So our requirements in 2023 were, less than the renewability that is shown by the utilities. And utilities can, they are operating under, they're required to procure energy and deliver service at least cost. And so a lot of times they will sell renewable energy credits if they have them in a greater supply than what their requirements are.
Mm-hmm. And is this before the changes that were made last year?
Correct. This is 2023, correct.
So.
Yes, so those changes will, we have by 2035, the law on the books now is for 100% renewable energy, and so you won't see, you'll see a different physical delivery mix, but you will see a renewable energy credit mix that is 100% renewable.
Okay.
And this slide just kind of compares the two. One of the things here, the difference between those two things, I wanted to point out that nuclear, for instance, our utilities have contracts for nuclear energy from the Seabrook plant in New Hampshire and through 2034. And they have ownership share, so a small share, but they have an ownership share of that Millstone plant that I mentioned before in Connecticut. And so those resources are part of their entitlements, especially through 2034. It is a big part, 15 to 20%. That is not going to change, even though the renewable energy requirements are increase over time. They will just need to purchase renewable energy credits in order to cover up that nuclear energy.
It would be interesting to see this, the same comparison projected out, or.
You guys shut
off
for sale?
2034, 2035, that kind of realm, because it is gonna be different, but we also need to. But thank you.
Yes, that was my last slide.
Okay, fantastic.
Yes.
What are the appendixes?
So I have a lot of other slides in the appendix that go into more detail about the utilities. And some more detail on like wholesale power costs, et cetera, and some of the things that I talked about. We have an annual energy report that we submit every year. A lot of these slides are from that. It was linked on the comprehensive energy plan slide. And so I wanted you to have some of those. And so we can get into them when there's more time.
Fantastic,
Yes.
which I hope there is. So, thank you, and so appreciate you taking the time to explain all this to us. Great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope to be back for part 2.
I hope so too. Okay, awesome. All right, super. We're gonna move now to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And we have Gail Seelig here with us, so welcome. So again, a topic shift. Thank you, team, for rolling with a gear shift of topics. And I know you've got some other folks here. I say, is it just you joining us up here? or-
All the people want to hear me.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I'm so glad you this morning.
I'm just getting connected.
Yeah, no worries. It's all good.
Sorry.
It's okay. It looks like you're making progress.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Maybe while we are waiting here a minute, can we take a second to introduce ourselves to you, Sven? Yeah, go ahead.
Hey Gus, birthday party in the Aspen here.
Jerry Williams from Rutland.
And Watson from the Washington District, and then we're in the committees.
So, works from Bennington District, please stop back out again.
Okay, thank you very much. For the record, I'm Gus Seelig. I'm the director for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. I think for all but the chair, this is the first time I've actually had the pleasure of testifying in a committee room. We meet at Covered's annual meeting. So it's great to see you last summer and good to get to know all of you again. I may have well testified with Senator Bongartz the first time. Here's Senator Bongartz. So that's how old I am.
And how
Testified when I was on ag.
Okay, all right. Thinking of that, even in some other rooms. With me today is our policy director, Polly Major, and our director of conservation and rural development, Trey Martin. But because we've got just a very brief time, I'm gonna provide the testimony this morning, which is to give you an orientation to the Housing and Conservation Board and the wide array of our programs. You're looking at a picture of a bird's eye wildlife management area, which is a parcel we helped acquire in 2013. It's about 2,800 acres, added greatly, and at least retired Representative Helm tells me it's a great place to deer hunt. He proudly told his committee about a deer that we've gotten there one time. This slide is about our statutory purpose, and I wanted to take a moment to talk about that, because we're really the place where your oversight as a natural resource committee always comes up against the question of how do we handle the built environment. And Vermont has, going back to something called the Countryside Commission almost 100 years ago, kind of articulated a land use policy of compact settlements surrounded by a working landscape. And you see that you're looking at the Shaftesbury North Bennington town line. Our mission statement goes very much to economic vitality and quality of life, not just to conserving land or building or preserving housing. And we think about that as we think about how to implement our programs. In terms of that town line, this is how our mission is played out in the town of Shaftesbury over 3 decades. The first thing that happened is that Stanley Tools pulled out of Shaftesbury in the early 90s, and the community came to us and said, we really need a reason for people to come to Shaftesbury to stop here. And they wanted to buy the poet Robert Frost's house and turn it into a museum, which we helped them. Historic preservation is actually part of our conservation mission. And we've helped in about 80 places all over the state, from old churches that get turned into performing arts centers to country stores, use our historic preservation mission for historic buildings that are going to have public use. About a decade later, a group called the Sage City Syndicates in 2 different deals wanted to conserve land around Lake Perrin, a beautiful body of water, and create a public recreation area, and we actually did that. And our founding board chair, I think, has helped build trails that go around Lake Perrin and over the Frost House that the public gets to use. That group knew about our dual mission, and so flash forward another dozen years, and 3 different municipalities came together to help us create 23 units of housing on a 2.5 or 3 acre parcel that the group had held out from conservation. And the way they did that was Shaftesbury changed its zoning to allow intense development on 3 acres. The village of North Bennington extended its water line there, and the town of Bennington extended its sewer line. So I know a lot of you represent lots of small towns, and this is a way that a very small town has used our mission over 3 decades to their benefit. And from the housing there, you can.
Sorry, there's a icon that's jumping up and down.
Yeah,
We can't actually see on this screen. So, if I.
Maybe by maximizing.
I'm just trying to get this, get.
Gonna keep popping up.
Yeah.
This room is like technologically cursed, I swear, don't say that.
Maybe I'll try to leave and rejoin.
You only have 15
I
minutes.
realize that. You like to.
I mean, I can live with that if that's what it needs.
I can as well,
If
because
you
Yeah.
can look at it on
Yeah.
our screen on our phones too.
it's not showing up. in
It's
the-
not on our computer. It's not.
Yeah, it's okay.
Well, it's not here, so.
Maybe it's just there.
It's just there.
Okay, well,
Apologies.
sorry about that.
Oh, look at that.
So,
You for the rescue.
I'm gonna be a little bit dangerous because I'm sure that Senator Beck knows the stories of St. John's.
Man, I made 2 out of 3 there.
Way better than you. But the first picture on the left is actually a building that got built about 2004. After there'd been a fire in the downtown, and the group that we work primarily with nonprofits, not exclusively. Rebuilt the building as housing for the elderly, and they created commercial space. And there was actually an opportunity that they had to rent it out when video was a big thing to Blockbuster, and they said, we think we can do better. We think that's not
They did
what
way better.
the community,
That's my bookstore.
Oh,
Yes.
They'll come together.
when I said I was a dangerous territory, it's a great bookstore. I bought books there, I had coffee there. And it's a great contribution to the community. A decade later, after a lot of difficulty in town government and the whole select board was voted out, there was a community visit conducted by the Council on Rural Development. And the consensus that the community came to was that they weren't gonna have a good downtown until the building on the right was turned around. It's owned by an out-of-state investor from Massachusetts. He left 10,000 square feet of commercial space, mostly vacant, most of the 30 years he owned it. He had a Section 8 contract from the federal government, so he had a great cash flow for lousy apartments, long-term bed bug infestation, not great management, and a building in decay. And the community and Senator Kidd said, this is our #1 priority. We got to turn this property around. And we've actually worked with the community. It's now under local ownership, including a condominium that went to the local economic development corporation for the commercial space, and they have got all the commercial space now leased up. At least the last time I was in San Diego, space was occupied.
Yeah, that's true.
So a lot of our focus is on, building in our downtowns and our smart growth centers. While we also help communities do what St. Johnsbury did by conserving Observatory Knob, which is in walking distance of downtown, perhaps not for a very elderly and not very physically able person, but it's a great place to picnic, to walk, to have quiet places to recreate. This is what we've done all the time, and because our time's limited, I'm not gonna focus on the numbers, but I'm happy to come back and talk about that again in terms of the rural part of Vermont. We've worked with 1,300 working lands businesses. And I do want to make a note that if the farm's conserved, of those 175,000 acres of land, there's an awful lot of wetland, awful lot of forests included in those acreages. These are our conservation programs and some other programs writ large. I just want to make a quick mention that about 2012, then Chairman Dean changed our statute to add water quality and protection of the surface waters of the state. And since that time, we've conserved about 1,400 acres of wetlands and 80 miles of riparian buffers, the farm projects we've done since then. And the Rural Economic Development Initiative is a grant writing program to support small towns and small communities, small businesses in those communities that we should talk about on another day, but we just helped the Canaan Library, for instance, win a $900,000 grant. The meat plant that Carl Cushing has over in Ferrisburg also won a $1 million grant, often helping small town stores win Northern Borders grants to get reopened as community enterprises. Again, I'm not gonna linger here because of time, but this is the Arlington Town Forest. We work with municipalities in buying land, we work with private landowners, we work with nonprofits like the Nature Conservancy, and we often are supporting state acquisition and sometimes federal acquisition of land. Whenever we're doing that, we're asking both the municipality and the Regional Planning Commission, is this acquisition consistent with the town plan? This is a great example of private conservation in the Northeast Kingdom, and Senator Bongartz, you may remember that this is close to 3,000 acres, public access across 6 peaks. Governor Cunin wanted to buy this in 1989. And a family from New Jersey came in at the last minute and got the deal. She was hopping mad, thought about going to court. Her staff talked her out of that. And 30 years later, we did a working forest easement with the family that bought it. They've been great stewards, lots of water quality protection, both around those 2 bodies of water, but also upland streams, and a great place, again, to recreate with some public access. And we expect will need to be more. We talk about 30 by 30, and Act 59, more work with private owners. I'm not going to talk about why people are doing conservation easements, but it is often to their financial benefit. It can be to their tax benefit. It can let them reinvest in their farms when that's the case. And this property up in Essex County is actually farmland that is decommissioned in order to enhance water quality and reduce the threat of flooding. To speak to flood resilience, we've done this on several occasions. The picture on the left is the aptly named Water Street Park in Northfield. There used to be 7 homes there that flooded in Irene. They all took buyouts. We supported those buyouts so that people could get 100% of their value. There was actually a story on the national program Marketplace after our 23 flooding, because the flooding hit this park. Some debris was removed, and it was a park again within 3 days. We just did a 12-acre site that Sorsasimo Lumber used to own over in Brattleboro. Again, to do flooding, reduce flooding risk. The building you see on the right is in response to the flooding in Barry. It isn't built yet, but we just agreed to fund it in December in their downtown because they've lost so much housing in the north end. Energy is a part of this committee's jurisdiction. After Irene, we worked with the philanthropic source and helped stand up a company that builds a product called Vermont in Hartford. And this is a mobile home park in Waltham, just not quite a mile out of downtown Virginia's. We extended the sidewalk. The park had been basically abandoned, and it's been fully restaffed with these net zero modular homes. There's a new product on the market that's called a zero energy ready mobile home. One of the things we've learned is you really have to get to high volume to get the cost down. We had 7 of them delivered to a park in Bennington this winter, and 19 more are set to go to Brattleboro next year as part of moving some people at Tri-Park, the state's largest co-op, out of harm's way because they're living in the floodway now.
Those homes being built in Vermont?
These
Patrick?
These are being built, these were built in Vermont. This fellow has no interest in scaling up the price point. We originally thought $80,000 to $90,000. He's now well over $200,000. The product coming out of New York, where he does like 1 a week. He's happy with a 1 a week lifestyle. You gotta get it's a much higher volume to get the price down.
Okay.
Farmland conservation is a big part of our conservation work, but I think also what you see in the next couple slides is, in addition to conserving our best farmland, this fellow was a high school hockey and baseball star at Harvard. He went off and studied economics in college. He decided Wall Street and hedge funds was not for him. He came back. He's probably farming about 1,000 acres up and down Route 100 and over to Waterbury. And we helped him acquire this parcel in Waitsfield along the Mad River. Lots of riparian protection. He permanently retired 6 acres. It's public path through his land. So we're getting, when we work with the farm community, lots of value besides food production. Different situation in Bennington, but similar results where this young woman who has a goat farm has protected 5 acres of wetland, more riparian buffers. It also manages 33 acres of forest. We do have a program that you should learn more about, but we won't go into today, that provides business planning and technical assistance to farmers and people in the forest products industry, serving over 100 folks a year. And we are seeing greatly increased profitability for those people who go through the business planning process, which means more contentment with their quality of life. This is a farmland access project over in the Middlebury area, and often when people sell development rights, they're doing it in order to facilitate intergenerational transfers to get the next family on the farm at a price that will cash flow rather than not. To speak to our housing work, because you've invested so much money in us since 2020, with the awards we made at our board meeting about a week ago, where we will serve close to over 5,000 households. And the investment that you gave us from ARPA and state surpluses will mean there'll be a total of about $1 billion spent on housing. And this slide is telling you where it all went. So we've done everything from home ownership to rental housing to infill and mobile home communities, infrastructure improvements. We began a program to provide farm worker housing. And for people who are really struggling, we have a home access program that reaches people in rural communities where you need a ramp or bathroom modification to stay there. We've almost doubled the size of the state's shelter system. And as a result of the opioid epidemic, we've now invested in 4 recovery residences all over the state. The last of which of those 4 will be opening in the next month or so, but 59 more beds. This is a list of all the housing programs that we have, and these are 2 homes built by Habitat for Humanity in 2 different locations But what's interesting about both of them is that, they were both, the lots both came from conservation deals. The one in East Montpelier, which also is a net zero home, came as a result of a helping Across the Mont Trail Association, which has a trail that goes from Montpelier, just with some interruptions all the way over to Wells River. We helped them secure some land. They didn't need frontage on Route 2 and a little bit up the hill. And they built this terrific net zero home. The Nature Conservancy on 3 occasions has donated lots to Habitat. This one is in Powell, or the Powell Town Forest, I think. Here. So when you ask, what does a dual mission get us? It gets us, among other things, cooperation between our housing and conservation communities. I want to speak a moment to you about smart growth as a way to look at how we protect natural resources. The building on the left was built on a fifth of an acre in downtown Winooski for veterans and for homeless vets. That's 28 apartments. So when somebody wants to know what does 140 units an acre look like, I show them that building. And not that we're all.
Good building.
It is a good looking building, and I have to say, you know, when national folks from both the VFW and the Legion came to the opening for this, it was a really moving experience for me. The other picture is in Burlington at the Old Catholic Diocese. And the story here of housing and conservation working together is that the developer, Eric Farrell, could have built 25 castles here and probably gotten all of his money with the use of the lake. And there was actually, he proposed instead to do something different, and there was a lot of opposition. What happened was that the Vermont Land Trust worked with the city of Burlington, got some money from us, and raised in total over $1 million to conserve 12 acres that sits along the lake as a public park. It went to the city as a park. And that changed the nature of opposition to development of this site, such that there will now be, when it's all built out, over 1,000 homes here. That's 75 units to the acre. And you've probably heard me say this before, but if we were to build to this level of density, we can build 30,000 homes on 400 acres. If you cut that down to 7.5 units to the acre, we still only need 4,000 acres to get close to the state's goals. So we don't need, in my opinion, to trash Vermont's environment to meet our housing needs. We can do 2 things at once. We can have a great environment a world-class environment that will draw people to Vermont, that Vermonters who want to hunt and fish and snowmobile and hike and birdwatch can enjoy, and we can still have vibrant communities all over the state. Not everybody will want to live in this density. I'm not trying to suggest that, but I think we can continue that policy of compact development. I think with work we've done over the last 2 years in permitting, we're expanding the number of areas where it's going to be easier to develop. But density can be the friend of our protection of natural resources. And I will say that repeatedly to all of my environmental friends as somebody who has his name on about 500,000 acres of conservation easements and purchases over the years. We're just about out of time. So this is the only slide we'll show you on Act 59, which is the Community Resilience and Biodiversity Protection Act. But here are its goals, which is to sustain biodiversity, to maintain landscape connectivity, to support watershed health, to promote resilience, to provide opportunities for recreation, to support historic settlement pattern, and to support working farms and forests. We have been in the process of conducting an inventory in phase 1 of that we completed that and reported to you on it last summer. We've just gotten a grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for a program called America the Beautiful. Just signed a grant agreement this week. So we're about to hire some consultants. So we've just awarded contract. Will be working with us and staff at the Agency of Natural Resources to guide actually putting the plan together, that we're happy on a different day to come back and talk to you about in more detail. Last thing I just want to leave you with, because I'm thinking about my friend, colleague, the late Connie Monica, who died Christmas Eve, is the work he did first for Governor Snelling and then for Governor Dean. And that included adding to lots of state forests and parks, but also adding two new parks, one of which is this one, Green River Reservoir. And if you've never spent a summer's day here or gone camping here, I can't recommend it highly enough. It's the largest body of water from which there's no development along the shoreline of the state. There was one fellow who decided to improve his view. He cut the trees down. Connie and Angie took a report, got a big settlement. It was long enough to go. The trees are growing back up, so you can't really see his house anymore. We also did the Albert Dune State Park. We've added other state parks around the state. But my view in terms of the work this committee does is that this feeds the economy of the Morrisville area. It adds to quality of life. It's made Lamoille County a place that people want to come to, as are many of the other resources that you're not supposed to protect. Last thing I just want to say is we get our funding primarily through property transfer tax. It's not magic money. It's monies that end up being appropriated by your fellows across the hall. We need your support. There's a lot of demands, as you know, on the state budget. But we do leverage these funds, and that's part of our statute is to consider the need for leverage. Farmland programs leveraged by a federal grant, generally 1-to-1. Our partners are usually leveraging natural resource acquisitions at a higher rate than that, sometimes as much as 8 or 9-to-1 in terms of conservation. Sometimes when it's a small community project, it's less than that. And with that, knowing that we're out of time, I'm gonna say thank you. But you haven't had a chance to ask any questions. And so I'm happy to stay, or if you need to get your lunch before the governor's address, I'm happy to come back, as are Polly and Trey.
Well, thank you. Any questions at this point? Yeah, sure.
But I think coming back would be great, but remind me how much of the property transfer tax was supposed to be going to BHD. There's a percentage I forgot what it is.
Well, it's been a little bit changed over the years, but it's around half.
Okay.
And there's a deduction for the tax department. There's a couple of other things. And last year was actually increased, and that increase was intended by the people who pushed it forward with the increase to go to housing. But at any rate, it currently would generate for us about $34 million a year. Because we did a housing revenue bond with the governor in his first year in office, we actually are obligated to pay $1.5 million a year on the debt service. So that bond is higher.
Great, thank you. Well, I do anticipate, as we have bills that are relevant, having you back. I do have lots of questions for you, but we can talk about them another time. So thank you. And with that, we